This is gonna take a lot. Good grief, that is hard. It doesn't seem like that changed at all. This is a lot harder than I thought it was gonna be. Did it make a difference at all? Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. We love being out by the fire pit, but one thing I don't like about being out here is our seating. I've always wanted a big curved bench to go around the pit, but I've never known how to do it. But now, I think I've got an idea. Let's give it a shot. I've got a tool that I've never actually tried before, and it's a tube bender. This is 1.5 inch square tubing that I'm gonna try to run through this bender and see if I can make a big curve out of it, but I've never done it before. The hard thing about this, I mean, one of the hard things is it's very long, but it's also heavy. So I don't know how to use this thing, but I think feed the steel in there and then you squoosh it down with this thing, and it puts pressure in the middle, and then you crank it and it creates a little bit of a bend, but that is not enough pressure. Some people will say, Bob, why don't you just read the instructions? Well, the instructions that came with this are not helpful at all, so that's why. Okay, so you can see a little bit of a curve there. So now we crank it down a little more. So the intent is for this curve to be like this. I really cranked it down on that one. I'm out of breath because that is hard work. I actually don't know how far I have to bend this yet, but we can go to Fusion 360 and I can look at my model and take a measurement, and then I know how. Let's go to Fusion. So I drew this thing up in Fusion, not really to make plans for it, but really just to figure out how big the curve needed to be. So I measured out the fire pit and then drew a bunch of circles and then made some simple steel. So when I go down here and look at the piece of steel that I'm working on, all I have to do is measure from point to point, and then it tells me the distance from those points on the actual piece of steel. It needs to be 84.8 inches. So if I get that measurement, I know I'm done bending. Wow. So this point right here needs to be right here. Oh no. Okay, so I don't have enough height in this room to bend the piece like I need to, but that means that I have to be able to take it outside. So I'm gonna put it onto this thing, which is lower, but it's not wide enough for the bender. So I'm gonna put a piece of wood here, screw that down, and then screw the bender to that, and then carry it outside and bend it. My back's gonna feel awesome. This is a bad idea. Anthony broke it, but he gave me a good idea. So we're actually gonna try to clamp this thing to the bumper of my Land Cruiser and see if the weight of the car will help make it easier to, sure, why not?
Wow.
Well, good grief, that is hard. This is a lot harder than I thought it was gonna be. Like a lot. Whew. Did it make a difference at all? It doesn't seem like that changed at all. If this is shorter, it's trying to put more pressure in a smaller area. But if this is longer, theoretically you could push these down more and get more of a curve. I'm not really sure how that works. This is the second piece, and there's something really weird going on. The first one was so hard to move, and this one is not. That's so crazy, and so much easier. And I think the profile of this piece of steel is actually different than the first one because there's a tiny little gap in there, so it doesn't feel as tight. And I can do it with one hand. We did add some WD-40 to the surface, and I moved these dies or rollers or whatever all the way to the outside. That helped a lot, but I think the piece of steel is a big change. Okay, so now that I've got a curve in this one, which I think is enough, I'm gonna take it up to the fire pit and actually lay it on the ground and make sure that it looks right, because that's really what's important. Both sides need to go in about 4 inches. So as I put more bend in this, I can tell that it's getting harder to do, and I think that's because it's squishing the tube, which is making it wider, which is adding more friction in the little area. So if you do one of these, it's gonna start out easier and it's gonna get harder. Let go! So now I've got all of the different pieces that I need for this cut, and so I just have to put in these cross pieces and tack them in place. Then I have to tack all of the legs in place. Now eventually I'll go back and fill in all those welds to make them super strong, but for now we can move on to something else. So we have this one that is at this stage, but I also have another one that is not this far along that we need to use to figure out some math. Now it's time to put the wood on top of this, or at least figure out how to put the wood on top of this. If you take planks, these are 1x4s, and you lay them down like this, you're gonna have a gap that's smaller in the front than it is in the back. Now, that's fine, but I'm me, and I like to complicate things, so what I want is for the gap to be the same from the front to the back. The way to do this is by finding the center point, the diameter, do a little bit of math, and then figure out an angle to cut these pieces, and we can do that on the floor. So what I've done here on this other one is I've drawn a straight line with some tape from each edge to where they meet, and that theoretically is the center of this circle, of both of these circles. And so from that point, I can take a string to the outside edge of my piece, and if I pull that tight, that shows me the angle that I need to cut off. So all I have to do is make a mark here, and then make a mark here, and that should tell me the places I need to cut on this piece, and if I cut it on this one, theoretically every other piece should be the same. And you may be asking yourself, why didn't he just go to the Fusion model and take the measurements from there, because it will be exact. And that is true, except that bending these pieces ended up not being exact to the Fusion model. So my measurements didn't quite transfer. I can't use that model to figure out the details here. I'm just gonna have to do it on the fly. So this is a taper jig, which should allow me to be able to cut this angle, really shallow angle, along a very long piece. I bought this thing like, honestly, maybe 20 years ago, and I've used it twice, maybe 3 times. But it's the perfect thing when you need it. All right, so I'm rethinking this a little bit. Instead of having the board centered on this center point, I shifted it over so that I'm trying to figure out how to make 1 angle cut instead of 2. And I wanted to just verify that it's a 2-degree cut that I can make on one side. So if I make a 2-degree cut on this side, I'm gonna end up with this shape. These ends are gonna be wrong, but that's okay because once I get all these in place, I'm gonna smooth out the curve on the front and the back of this. I think it'll work. So that's gonna work out, I think. I just have a whole lot of those cuts to make and I have to go buy the lumber to do it. Those have to be attached to the steel frame. And in the past, I've drilled a bunch of holes through square tubing like this and then driven screws up from the bottom into the bottom of the wood so you don't see the fasteners. That's fine, except that you have to drill a hole for every one of these on the front and the back through 2 pieces of steel. This is box tubing, so you gotta go through both sides of it. So I came up with another idea that I think will make it easier. This is perforated angle, and it's basically just an angle iron with a bunch of holes drilled in it already. So instead of drilling a bunch of holes myself, I got pieces of this. I'm going to lay them inside this frame and make cuts so that I could bend it and kind of follow this curve all the way around. Then I'll just tack weld through every few of these to connect this to the frame, and then that gives me holes that I can drive screws straight up through into the bottom of the wood. This is a little bit more expensive than just drilling a bunch of holes, but you don't have to worry about going through drill bits. It's not gonna take like 3 days to do. I can go ahead and get it done. I wanted to point something out. These are covered in a really thin layer of zinc. They're not galvanized, which you don't want to weld galvanized material. It creates fumes that are terrible for you. These zinc coated ones have a much thinner coat, which is still not good for you, but it's much easier to handle if you've got some air movement and plenty of ventilation. We've got ventilation in the shop. I'm gonna have a mask on. We should be good. I thought the tube bending was hard, and it was hard, like physically hard to do. Good grief. We ended up figuring it out, but this is hard for an entirely different reason. It's like math hard. But if I wedge them all in, it's gonna spread the back out, which is the opposite of what I need to do. I tried to figure out how to do angles to cut all these pieces in the right way. They don't look right, so I flipped the entire thing upside down and I'm using wedges to be able to make it right. Now this is cool because we can just drive in screws from here, hold it all in place, but it also gives me the opportunity to actually fix it. So you can see that the wood down here and the frame are not in the right position relative to each other. And the cool thing about these wedges is that you can fix that by driving in a wedge, and it's gonna spread them apart. And so if you compound that distance over the course of several pieces, it changes the angle of all the different pieces of wood in relation to the frame. So you can kind of tweak it until it looks right. I need to now spread the back in. Unspread the back? I don't know. So basically yesterday, I got all the pieces cut, laid them down, and it just didn't look right. And I spent probably another 45 minutes trying to figure out what I did wrong, rather than trying to figure out how to solve it. Turned out that using the wedges that I cut off was a way to fix it rather than like diagnose what I did wrong in the first place, which honestly at this point doesn't even matter. Okay. Well, that actually wasn't as hard as I was expecting it to be. Okay, so now that we got all the pieces in place, we can screw them into the frame, but you'll notice that these holes are actually way bigger than the head of a screw. So we're gonna have to put some washers over top of them, drive in some short screws into the back of the wood in this position, and once they're all screwed down, I should just be able to pick it up and flip it over. But before I flip it over, I need to figure out how to get a nice smooth curve on the back side and on the front side. The front side is actually pretty close, so I think I can just take a sander, kind of smooth that curve out. But back here, pieces are all over the place. So I'm gonna make a little kind of offset tool that will allow me to draw a curve around here that will match this curve perfectly. The outside of this is running into the little metal lip thing that I added. So I'm gonna lift it up a little bit by putting a piece of wood. That means that I need to temporarily attach that piece of wood to the bottom of the saw. This thing's almost finished. I got a few more things to do. One of them is to 3D print some more caps like this, and these are made to go in the end of the square tubing. You can put them on the feet if you want to, but more specifically, I made them to fill in these gaps to keep bugs and dirt and water and all that type of stuff out of here. So I'll get all those capped off, and then I also got some solar-powered LED lights. Now we're gonna put these underneath the seat so that they're shining down onto the ground. It'll look really nice. Last big thing is to add finish to this wood so it'll last outside. This is a project that I've wanted to do for many years now, and I put it off because I thought it was gonna be hard. Well, it turns out it was hard, but it was an opportunity to learn a bunch of new stuff and kind of figure out a way to solve problems as they showed up. If you've got a project that's like that for you, something you've been putting off because it's hard, let me know down in the comments because we actually might be able to share some ideas and help each other out so we can get stuff done. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. It's time for bloopers. We love being out here. We love being out. Oh, I want this to pop you in the face. No, it's not. These are called leg pokies. Ah! Real good. What happened to my pencil? That's right, I threw it in. Because maybe we can help each other out and share some ideas. See, I don't even know what I did after that.